Picture this. You finished your first book and nailed it. The plot, the characters, all the twists and turns. This one's a winner, and all you need is the right cover. If you've got my art skills, this is the part where panic usually sets in. Enter the cover villain, hero to writers everywhere. Founded by noted author Remy Flagg, Cover Villain focuses on composite image covers for science fiction and fantasy writers. Give them the details, and they'll craft a cover using popular trends that everyone will want to see. But wait, you say, I've got ideas of my own. No problem, as Cover Villain loves a good collaboration. As they say, our goal is to put a little villain in every cover we make. Want to know more? Then head to covervillain.com and follow them on Facebook and Instagram.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Citywide Blackout, your home for music, movies, and more. I'm your host, Max Bowen. In this episode, author Nancy Burke and I talk about her new book, Only the Women Are Burning, available on October 1st through Apprentice House Press. Now, one of the more unique aspects of the book is how it blends elements of mystery, science fiction, domestic fiction, fabulism, and feminist literature, and we look at how it all came together.
In this episode, I am very, very excited because we are chatting with author Nancy Burke for her new book, Only the Women Are Burning, available on October 1st through Apprentice House Press. This is Nancy's third book, and this touches on a number of different subjects, but we'll dive all into that with the assistance of the author right here. Nancy, thank you so much for joining me. It is great to have you here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Now, I am currently reading this book, folks, so take it from me. You want to check this one out. It's really good. One of the things about the thing that you get right off the bat is that this is a blend of a number of different subjects, different genres. Before we dive into the plot, I want to ask you about this. Was this your plan going into it?
I had no plan going into this book.
Good answer.
I was sitting, this is the fun part of this, is I was sitting under a tree at a pool club with my journal in my lap, just jotting things down. And this imagery came to me of a woman walking through her normal everyday suburban routine and then just suddenly bursting into flames and disappearing. And I wrote it down in my journal and I just said, what in the world what just came to me like this lightning bolt? And I struggled for a while to figure out what I was actually going to do with this idea. So it took a while to sort out what this was actually going to do in terms of taking shape.
Okay. Now, in terms of the story, this all begins with Cassandra Taylor, our main character. She is getting on the train to work, like you said, a normal, everyday, routine day, nothing unusual, and then suddenly a person bursts into flame. Tower of fire, this poor person's gone, but they're not the only one. Two other people die at the same moment, basically, the same time, including one of Cassandra's friends. And she decides, okay, this is what's going on here. I know the police dismiss it as a cult thing. Why do you think that would happen?
Well, it's easy to jump to conclusions about something that is going to take so much investigating and so much knowledge beyond the scope of a fire department or a police department. And right away, when the police are talking to Cassandra, because she was a witness, she gets this sense of them reaching conclusions before any evidence is really presented. And so she starts getting this sense of being dismissed. And I think that feeling of being dismissed because of who she is and what she knows is very disturbing to her. And that really is the trigger to get her to basically submerge herself into this investigation that she undertakes on her own.
And how does she do that? How does she investigate this? I mean, what does she sort of bring to the table that can help her out?
Well, she's an at-home mom who has a part-time job teaching at a museum. So nobody knows that she's got this amazing scientific background in geoarchaeology and anthropology. And she instinctively knows that somewhere in her background of her scientific knowledge, she has an answer. And she realizes that she doesn't have any credibility anymore because she's been an at-home mom forever. So she starts to dig into her past and the things that she discovered when she was a graduate student. And she starts to see that there are some things that could potentially be happening in her town that happened elsewhere, either in India, which is where she did some graduate work, or at Stonehenge, where when she was a graduate student, she said to her professors as her thesis, why did the ancient Druids choose this particular site, the Salisbury Plain in England, to build this huge monument? Who cares what it was about? Why did they choose this place? And in her graduate school investigation, in her backstory, is what feeds her curiosity about how she might actually start seeing clues about what's going on in her modern suburban New Jersey town.
She definitely seems a rather unlikely detective early on, So I think it's kind of cool that she sort of pivots into this role where she's like now diving into the where, the how, and the why. Why fire? Of all the ways that these people could die, why choose fire?
That question we're going to have to ask the gods who brought this idea to me.
Okay, fair enough.
Because I don't really know why it was fire. Huh. But as I pondered this, once I got this idea, I actually went home and did some Google research and just typed in spontaneous human ignition. And up came spontaneous human combustion, which I had never heard of, which is kind of this, the paranormal people get into this and believe that is this phenomenon that is potentially true. So as I dug further into it, I got more and more interested in this idea of, the authorities saying that a human body cannot happen. But I chose it really because if you really go back in history, Charles Dickens used spontaneous human combustion in his novel Bleak House to kill off a crooked character named Mr. Crooks. And Dickens was criticized for using this because people in England back in the 1860s said, oh, spontaneous human combustion can't possibly happen. And Dickens' response in a later version of the book, in his introduction, basically stated, well, no one has ever proven that it can't happen. So he was defending his own use of the phenomenon. Now, no one that I had ever heard of ever used this phenomenon in a novel, whether it, taking something like that and placing it into a realism kind of setting. But I did discover this year that an author named Kevin Wilson wrote a book called Nothing to See Here. And in that book, there's a pair of twin children who, when they get agitated, burst into flames on their skin level. And I was delighted to see that somebody else was as crazy as I was to use this phenomenon in a book. And I actually reached out to Kevin to talk to him and watched some interviews of him on YouTube to find out what what was his inspiration to use this phenomenon in his book. And I don't know if we have time to go into all of that now, but he's quite a fascinating character, and he really does write beautiful novels. So I'll put a plug in for Kevin, even though I've never actually met him. I actually adore his book. So I don't know why fire. I only know that it just kind of showed up, and I said, all right, I'm going to run with this.
Now, you mentioned the research you had to do. I'm curious how much time you spent building the world of this book, where it takes place and what happens here, before you actually started writing it.
The town itself, the environment, the home, the suburbs, that was not difficult because that is very much like the community that I live in. Suburban community, a lot of big old Victorian homes, lots of families, kind of peaceful. So I wanted that serene suburban thing to kind of come through. The hard thing about this book, research-wise, was the science, the answering the question of how can Cassandra solve this mystery? And the trick there was I had to make this phenomenon believable in a setting like a suburban New Jersey town. And that really was my my biggest challenge of this book. I just felt like, oh, if an agent takes a look at this book and reads the premise, they're just going to roll their eyes and say, oh, good Lord, no. And, there were 73 agents who probably did that, because that's at least as many submissions that I sent out for this book until I found my publisher. But it is a cross-genre book. So it's very, very hard for an agent to find a place in the marketplace, which is very market segmented, for a book like this to actually find a home and find a market. So the science was the part that was the challenge. And I studied geology as an undergraduate. I started out in college as an undergraduate geology major and switched to anthropology. So I had that background. And I've always been fascinated with earth science, with earth energy, with atmospheric energy, what goes on under the earth. And I had a really, really good time digging into some of these phenomena that go on around our globe, and then trying to take them and extrapolate something fabulistic about it to make it fit into this story.
Now, when it came to blending the different genres together, did it take a lot of time to find a balance? Because just reading the prologue, I definitely get a lot of the different angles you're going with here, with the mystery, the science fiction, but also the domestic aspect of it as well. How did you make this even out without being too much of one thing or another?
I had a lot more backstory in this book in an earlier version. This book took 5 full drafts. In my first full, I just threw them out and started over, and maybe took a few excerpts from it to move it forward into a draft. I somehow wanted Cassandra's knowledge to be beyond her suburban little lifestyle, and she had that because when she was young, she was an adventurer. So I did a lot of paring down. I left a lot of, I threw out a lot of babies with the bathwater. I think back now and I say, oh, I loved that piece. It's too bad it didn't end up in the novel. I had this one story where I had a Jamaican nanny who was involved with Santeria, which is a religion that goes on in the islands, actually with a group of women who were burning birds in sacrifices in backyards because of a superstition that they held around these women burning. And I loved that, but I had to toss that out because I just had too many pages and I was going off in too many different directions. But I wanted to bring forth the idea, and we're dealing with some of that now in our current pandemic mode, where depending on what people believe, they interpret events in a way that satisfies them, makes them feel like they understand, and makes them feel safe. And as Cassandra wanders through her town while she's investigating this mystery, she runs across people on the sidewalk, at the school bus, in the Starbucks when she stops and has coffee. And people engage her in conversation. Even her own 2 sisters have ideas about what could potentially be the cause of this thing. And she takes it all in a very respectful way, but she doesn't embrace anything that anybody says. She just kind of offers it up, and I offer it up in the book as a form of diversity to let people understand that not everybody thinks the same way about the things that happen to us in life. And I wanted that to come through in the community that she lived in, which is very much like the community that I live in.
You talk about people approaching things with their own assumptions, with their own feelings about how things can happen. Do people tend to shy away from the weird suggestions, the weird answers to these situations?
Well, it depends on who they are. Some people love bizarre explanations because they have imaginations and it satisfies that kind of wild and crazy imagination. And other people will be dismissive because they're very pragmatic. Just like in schools of philosophy, you've got the Stoics who we've got the imperialists who, if you can't show it to me in evidence, I don't want to have a discussion about it. There are people who have religious beliefs, and they interpret everything based on their religious beliefs or their, the beliefs that come out of their culture. And some of those things are hardwired in us. So we struggle to kind of manipulate what we know to fit in with those patterns that we've already developed in our minds. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine. As I get older and I see friends aging, I push myself against the patterned thinking that people get into as they age. Because something worked for them in the past, they assume that it is always going to work for them. And so I'm always challenging people to challenge their own basic assumptions and think about a different way to look at something that you've always taken for granted. Because you could, in fact, be wrong. And I think that's what Cassandra does with the police. She knows that they're going to approach these fires as either a crime or some kind of conspiracy or some kind of crazy lunatic fringe group of women, which would be victim blaming. And she pushes back against that and says, no, there's another more plausible explanation for this, and I'm going to show you this. And somehow I've got to figure out a way to get you to listen to me. So she uses the reporter that she meets. This reporter calls her and interviews her because she was a witness. And he accepts her credibility. And she, I could back up a little bit and I can say there's a reason her name is Cassandra. And the reason that her name is Cassandra is because she's named after the Greek character from Greek mythology. Cassandra was a priestess of Apollo. And Apollo fancied her. And so he gave her the power of sight so she could see into the future. And when she rejected his advances, he then put a curse on her so that even though she had the power of sight, no one would ever believe a word she said. So if you ever see a performance of Agamemnon and you see Cassandra, who went home to Greece with Agamemnon as a war bride, there's a wonderful scene where she sounds like a crazy woman, but she's bursting forth with, I will say, virtual flame in her angst and frustration and not being listened to, right? But what I learned as I went through this book is Cassandra had a brother named Helenus, a twin brother who she taught the gift of sight. And so while people wouldn't believe her, they would believe him. So our Cassandra in Only the Women Are Burning recognizes that she needs someone else to help deliver her message to the authorities. Otherwise, she's never going to get anywhere. So she uses this reporter, not uses him, but she and he befriend each other, and she allows him to be somewhat of the messenger to the authorities to get them to listen to her. It works, although I'm giving away spoilers now.
Just don't give away the ending, okay? That's the only thing I ask. No, keep the ending a secret. Is this an ongoing obstacle for Cassandra, just trying to be heard and being taken seriously?
Yes, I think it was her lifelong struggle. Some of the backstory is about her family of origin and her sense that her goals and dreams of going to college and going off to graduate school were kind of poo-pooed by her two sisters, who were much, much more traditional, housewifey people who didn't really have any aspirations of their own, and were a little suspicious of the kind of person she was and dismissed her, maybe out of jealousy, maybe out of not understanding, maybe out of their own insecurities. And so she grew up with that, or went through her adolescence with that. And her husband is very much like that. As you get further into the book, you'll see that he's not a Prince Charming. I'll leave it at that. I'll let the exploration of his character come out when people read the book. Mm-hmm. I think I should leave it there.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned earlier that you went through 5 drafts for this book. So clearly you were taking your time with it. You weren't trying to rush yourself. But when you started out, did you want to have it done by X date, or is it always gets done when it gets done?
I wanted this thing done a long time ago. I had 3 children. I was an at-home mom myself. I would squeeze my writing time in between all of the things that I had to do for family. I had a part-time job. I would write. And then I struggled with the book. I struggled with where it was going. I was struggling with who Cassandra was going to be, really. I mean, I think she started off in the original draft as like a police lieutenant. And I said, no, I can't write a police procedural, and I don't want to write a police procedural. And so I put the book aside. I wrote another book. My first book came out in 2006, and that was a young adult multicultural title called From the Abuela's Window, about Chile under Pinochet, and a magic realism element in that book as well. Then I enrolled in graduate school at Rutgers and got my master's in fine arts and creative writing. That was in 2009 to 2011. After that, I had another project that I worked on while this one kind of came up back and forth off the back burner as I struggled with the book. And that book was released in 2014. A nonfiction story about a woman in Estonia during World War II who was a child who actually escaped into Nazi Germany to avoid the Soviets who were taking over the country of Estonia, which is where she was from. And it was actually a true story based on interviews of a woman I met at a film. So I worked on these other things. I worked on short stories when I was in grad school because it was kind of clunky to try to write a novel and have it workshopped in our fiction writing workshops. And finally, after the second book was done, I said, you got to focus on this thing. You've got to figure this out. You've got to dig yourself into this and don't come up for air until it's done. And lo and behold, I think this book was finished in 2018. And that's when I started with the submissions process, hired an editor to read through it and give me some, line editing and flow commentary. So yes, it took me a long time to get my focus on this.
How does it feel to be done, to know that pretty soon it'll be out there for all the world to see?
It's nerve-wracking. It's kind of like, it's kind of like childbirth. It's like on October 1st is when this book is going to be burst into the world as its own entity. And on October 7th is when I do my book launch event at my virtual book launch event. And I'm excited about this. I have no idea what to anticipate in terms of how people are going to receive it. Early reviews have been good. So I'm excited. And of course, my next question is, okay, what will I do with Cassandra? Is she finished? I'm not sure that she is finished. And as I get through this book launch and I turn my attention to, okay, what am I going to sit down and write next? Cassandra keeps whispering to me. She keeps telling me that she's got more investigations to do, that there are more scientific things to explore. She is emerging into a different part of her own life. And it's kind of like, okay, what is she going to do next?
The Cassandra Taylor Mysteries has a nice ring to it.
I like that.
Just saying.
I like that. I have jokingly told friends that if whenever I walk into a room, what I would really want as the music to announce me would be the theme song from the Indiana Jones movies. And so I look at Cassandra kind of as a lapsed anthropologist, suburban stay-at-home mom who was emerging again into her adventurous life as a female Indiana Jones, which sounds a little crazy, but I could have a lot of fun with that. And I think my readers could too.
And I think that's what makes the difference, that you have fun with this, that getting this book out is not a chore. It's not like, okay, let's get it finished, get it published, get it done, that you really enjoy the character. How would you say Cassandra changed over the 5 drafts? I mean, you mentioned before that initially she was going to be a police lieutenant, but how else did she grow?
She started out as a police lieutenant, and then I thought I would make her a quirky character, and I had this idea of making her highly anxious and OCD-ish, where she was compulsive just about cleanliness, compulsive about how her thoughts just kind of led her down dark tunnels where she could have dead-ended. But then I said, no, I wanted Cassandra to be smart. I wanted her to have had accomplishments in her past life. And I wanted her to not have anything about herself that could be objectionable by the authorities who could discredit her. And a kind of quirky, crazy personality might have done that. So I said, no, I want her to be a smart heroine. And that's how she ultimately evolved into, who she was, with the backstory that she carries around with her.
Now, you had 73 rejections for this book prior to you finding the home.
Ouch, yes.
Did you ever consider just quitting, just saying, forget about it, I'm done?
Oh, of course I thought about it. But I have this philosophy about submissions. And it's kind of like the more submissions you do, the more your odds improve that you're going to get a yes. If X percent of your submissions is going to be a yes, the more no's you get, the more likely it is that you're going to get a yes with the remaining opportunities. I mean, you have to think that way. Otherwise, you would put it in a box and lock it up and never do it again. I sent it to, I just started querying agents, and I finally turned to Apprentice House Press, which was kind of an interesting story. Apprentice House is a press that is run at Loyola University. And it's run by faculty and students in the English department who have a concentration within their English major in the publishing industry, the publishing sector. Okay. So they created this press basically so that students would get publishing experience while they were undergrads. And one of the Rutgers English professors who I became acquainted with when I was a student there published her memoir through them several years ago. And when I was at my wit's end with trying to get a commercial, an agent with a commercial publisher, I just went online and looked up her book and saw who her publisher was and said, okay, let's take a look. And to my surprise, found out it was this college-based publisher. And I submitted my book to them just thinking, oh, what the heck, let's just give it a shot. And they offered me a publishing contract fairly quickly. And I was delighted, but at first I was hesitant because I thought I really wanted this book to be a commercial one. I wanted to find one of the big fives or, at least a reputable, more well-known small press. And then I woke up one day after Christmas, after somebody said to me, what did you want for Christmas this year, Nancy? And I said, I wanted a publishing contract, and nobody can get that for me except me. And I woke up and I said, I have an offer of a publishing contract. What, am I crazy? So I accepted their offer, and I have to tell you, working with the undergraduates who they do a manuscript evaluation course in the fall, which is when they selected my book. They do a program in the spring about marketing. So I had a student who was assigned to do a marketing plan for me, and I had a student assigned in a book design class who did the layout and did the book cover for me. I have taught writing at the college level myself, and I love working with students, and I love the educational aspect of what this press represents. And so I was thrilled, actually, to ultimately be working with undergrads. And it turned into this really, really wonderful collaborative effort with my students. And I have to give a shout out to Taylor, who is the girl who did the design of the cover, because she and I had a Zoom call one day, and I said, Taylor, I want you to be an award-winning book cover designer. I said, and I want that cover to be on my book. And she and I did, individually, we went to bookstores and we were exchanging photographs of book covers just to get some ideas. And she took an image that I sent her of the outline of the woman, which is on the cover. And she told me this story. This is a long story. I hope I'm not over speaking. She was working in her dorm room. This is before COVID, when she was still on campus. And she was working on this book cover in the middle of the night. And she filled the image with flame. And she let out this shout in the middle of the night, so loud and so excited that her roommate in her dorm room jumped out of bed and said, What? And so she knew when she hit it that she found the right design. for the cover. And she was so excited to show it to me. And I agreed with her immediately because I just thought it was phenomenal. So that's the story of my book cover and my work with my student undergrads.
What advice do you give your students who are perhaps writing their first book?
I had an experience this morning with that, actually, with a woman who was in my mom's group that I had formed when I was first a stay-at-home mom. She heard about my book, and she said, I always thought I had a book in me. And what I said to her was, sit in the chair, take out a pad and a pen or your laptop, and wait, and it will come. And that's the first basic step, because if you're not in the chair, you can't write. And there's a million things in life that will get you up and out of that chair. And what you have to say is no. You have to carve out time in your own schedule. I think this is particularly important to women who have a lot of other responsibilities, especially if they have children. I used to make appointments with myself and put it on my calendar. And I would say, okay, from 9 o'clock this morning until 12 o'clock this morning, I say no to everything. And I sit here and I write. And then at noon, I get up. I do all the other things that I have to do. This is, of course, when my children were at school and or out of school. And said no to PTA, said no to friends who wanted to have lunch, said no, I can't have a doctor's appointment during this time because I'm working. And when you devote that time to your work, you end up with a book. It might not be a good one on first draft, and I can certainly attest to that, but you will have the material that you need to carve and craft it into your book.
But what happens if you sit down, you schedule the time, and you just stare at the screen and nothing comes out? What then?
You still sit there. You write anything. You write, what did I have for breakfast this morning? What did it look like? What did it taste like? How did I make the coffee? What did the coffee smell like? Okay. Did I clean up the toast crumbs off the counter, or did I leave them there? You look at the details of your own life, and eventually something will come out, because you'll get past the physical and you'll get into the story, some story. And yeah, it might not be the story you end up with, but you might end up with a character. And then once you have a character identified, then you can play what I call the what if game. Here's this character. What if she was going to the train station to go to her measly little job that paid her $12 an hour, and a woman holding a coffee cup in front of her online burst into flames and disappeared? What would she do? And it happens. It just does. My first book was a children's book that was about a 12-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old girl. And it came from an experience that I had with one of my daughters when she was 6 or 7 years old, and she wanted to learn how to ride a bicycle. And she was terrified of the bike that she got for Christmas from her godmother because it said "Wild Child" on the side of the bike. She was too smart, and that meant too much to her, and that meant she should be afraid of this wild bike, right? And so we were walking back from the park in frustration with that, with having tried to get her to ride. And this woman in my neighborhood, who is a dear friend of mine now, came wandering over to us with this little old red bicycle that was covered with cobwebs. It had mold on the handlebars. It had 2 flat tires. And she looked at my daughter and she said, "This is a magic bike. Anyone who can try to ride this bike will be able to ride this bike." And within 2 days, my daughter was up riding that bike. And so that was the catalyst for a story about a young girl in Chile whose father was among the disappeared during Pinochet's military junta. And she had these 3 little old ladies who lived next door to her who had magic powers. And they gave her a magic bike. And what did she do to pay forward the gift of that magic bike to help another child whose parents were arrested? And who knows where that came from, but I think I read an article in the newspaper about Pinochet at that time being arrested and extradited from England to Chile to stand for his crimes. And I said, that's where I'm setting my book. And that's how it happened.
That is wonderful advice. That really is. Just write something, anything. Just vomit out the words, and like you said, maybe you'll get a character or a scene or an idea or something. But yeah, just make yourself write and get something out of it.
Yeah, because if you have the urge to write, the nugget of what you want to say is in you already. You just have to kind of mine through all the minutia of life and find it. And you will.
Now, the 3 books that you've written definitely are all their very own story, very, very different. But I'm curious as to what new things you encountered while writing your new book.
That's a really good question. It was so long. I'm kind of thinking to myself, what did I not encounter? But there are some things that come out in this story that reflect what I personally encountered in my life. Fiction is fiction, but a lot of fiction comes from true emotion that people experience in life. You can't write about people without having the experience of being a person or being able to try on another type of character other than yourself. And so the things that surprised me really were some of the observations that I made about women's lives, about what women do to cope with some of the things that they find difficult. There is a moms group in this book, and Cassandra has an opportunity to take a peek into some of the lives of some of these women who this happens to. And she reflects on this. There's this one sentence in chapter 1 that says, I understood that often women's struggles are of the silent variety. Things that women don't talk about, things that women bury, things that women pretend aren't there because they have to just get on with things. And this book gave me an opportunity to bring some of those silent struggles out and put them on the page so they can be acknowledged.
A couple more questions for you. What is the hardest part about writing a mystery novel?
The hardest part is the sequencing of the reveal. That is what makes a mystery, is the slow reveal of information and keeping the level of suspense high as each little piece of the puzzle kind of falls into place. Keep the reader with that feeling of suspense, of wanting to know, of wanting to turn that page, to find out what this clue is and what does it mean and what's going to happen next now that she knows this. One of the things that I am not when I do writing is an outliner. So that is probably the hardest thing for me. It's kind of like, okay, go back and read through it again. Go back and read through it again and see what naturally should occur next. And that's pretty much my process. Whereas I can't sit down and make a grid and say, okay, here we go, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. It just kind of flows organically, or sometimes it doesn't. But I stay in the chair.
Always stay in the chair. Now, you've got your release event, your virtual release event planned for October 7th. Give us the details for the folks who want to attend and help you celebrate the birth of this new book child.
Okay, well, it's on October 7th, and it's at 7:30 in the evening, and it is being sponsored by my wonderful local bookstore, Watchung Booksellers in Montclair, New Jersey. If anyone is listening, goes on their website and goes to their events, they'll find it, and they'll find the link. I have a link. It's not actually something you can kind of say out loud. I think it's crowdcast.io/burning. is the link. Or you can go on my Facebook page, or you can go on my website, nancyburkestories.com, where that is posted under my events page. And I would welcome everyone to come and join in. We're going to have some fun on that event.
The other thing that I definitely want to talk about, too, is the dedication in this book. This is dedicated to your friend. Can you tell me a little more why she was the one that you want to dedicate the book to?
Oh, sure. Okay. I dedicated the book to a friend of mine, Joanne Spira, who I've known since we were in our 20s, and we found out about a year ago that she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and she's been undergoing a very, very difficult series of treatments. So she's really kind of in a struggle for her life. Joanne is an amazing person. She is a social worker who advocates for children. She works with children who are undergoing treatment for cancer. She advocates in their school districts to make sure their education isn't interrupted while they're undergoing treatment. So every fall, Joanne does a big fundraiser, but because she's not well this year, that effort is suffering. So I promised her yesterday that I would give a shout out to her on my virtual book launch, because the book is dedicated to her, and ask people to make donations to the Valerie Fund on her behalf. And I've asked the bookstore who is sponsoring the event to please post that link during the event in the chat on the Crowdcast broadcast. And I'm going to devote some of the proceeds from the sales of my book to this cause as well. I sent her an email the other day to tell her I was doing this, and her response was, "Nancy, there you go, making me cry again." I said, "Joanne, it's the least I could do." Mm-hmm. So I just figured it's not only about me and my book, it's also about the people I love. And she's one of the women who would be in the book. She would be one of those wonderful women in that mothers group that Cassandra is part of. So thanks for asking that question.
Actually, since we're on the subject, I did want to also ask, are there other folks in your life who made it into the book, either as inspiring characters or as characters themselves?
Yes, my daughters. There are 3 children in the book. There's a slightly older daughter, and then there's a set of twins, and that's exactly what I've got. Lucky me. They're a little closer in age than they are in the book, but they definitely made it into the book. And I do have to say, this book is one of entirely of fiction, and any resemblance to characters in life, real or imagined, these are imaginary characters. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, folks, you heard it here first. Check out the book, Only the Women Are Burning, available October 1st through Apprentice House Press. And then October 7th, go to the virtual release party. Help Nancy celebrate this brand new book out there in the world. Nancy, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure as well.
Hey everyone, Max Bowen here. If you're a longtime listener of the show, you know how much I love Comixology. This is the best place to go for digital comics from every company out there, from the big 2 to independent creator-owned titles. Well, folks, the big news is that they are hitting the presses. In the spring of 2021, they'll be teaming up with Dark Horse Comics, publisher of titles such as Black Hammer, Hellboy, and Sin City, my personal favorite, to distribute print editions of Comixology originals, graphic novels, and collections. This is going to include the Eisner Award winner Afterlift, along with Breaklands, Youth, and The Black Ghost. I have read most of these titles. They are amazing. I cannot wait to add them to my bookshelf. Now, these will be available in comic shops, bookstores, and libraries, and more will be announced in the weeks and months to come. But if you want all the updates, go to ComixologyOriginals.com and follow them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
This is Angelina Singer, author of the Upper World series, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout, the best podcast for independent artists.
All right, everyone, that brings this episode to a close. You can follow the show on Facebook under Citywide Blackout and Twitter and Instagram under Citywide Max. Listen to the show on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, TuneIn, and now on Amazon Music, as well as every Saturday at 10 p.m. on Boston Free Radio. As always, keep those ears open.